Welcome to another episode of our live stream, My Journey to the Trinity. My name is Hussein. Happy to be with you. Happy you could be with me. I know it's late. I don't even do a live stream this late, but I just wanted to. I had one small idea, and I thought, you know what, I ought to go ahead and do something with it. And I know it's so late right now, but we to justify Islam. What I mean by that is that there's just so many things in Islam that um, it don't make sense. Um, and yet we just kind of wink, just kind of justify it. We allow their pathetic excuses, for why these problems exist within Islam. And I'm thinking that we're not doing them any favors. Hello, and then God bless you, salam, shalom, brother. We're not doing Muslims any favor by kind of just agreeing, with the with their justification of uh, the problems that they have within Islam. And for instance, one thing they tell us is that they tell us that abrogation is, that I mean, it's in the Quran three times on talking about abrogation. So it's a very well-known topic in Quran, and we kind of just go ahead and go along with it and say, okay, that's fine. This is an Islamic concept, abrogation, and but in reality, you know what? That's a really big problem. Abrogation is a very big problem, and it goes against so much of what um, so much of what um, Islam teaches about itself, what the Quran teaches about itself, and I think what I think we need to push him on this and not let them get away with sloppy little answers, about uh, their justification for um, for problems like this. I mean, let's just look at the issue of abrogation. Um, Look at all the things that the Quran says about abrogation. Look at this verse right here. And how can you think this is okay? How can you think this? Hello, Abdullah, God bless you. Lord bless you, sister. And it says, um, nothing of our revelation, not even a single verse, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we bring in its place one better or like it. Don't you know that Allah is able to do all things? And you have to put that excuse there. Allah is able to do all things to justify this because of what the Quran says about itself. It says that it is the eternal word, it's the uncreated word of Allah. It's eternal, it's unchanging, it's uncreated, it's there with Allah in heaven. It, uh, it is um, it is supposed to be absolutely perfect, and these are the things that the Quran says about itself. But if that's the case, then there's this Lawh al-Mahfuz, this perfect preserved tablet up in Jannah that Jibreel was getting the Quran from. There's a perfect tablet up in heaven that Jibreel uh, was getting the Quran from to give to Muhammad. And then all of a sudden, you come up with this abrogation, which is that Allah makes you forget some of it. And then he deletes some of it. To abrogate is like to delete. And you think, well, if it's perfect, if it's eternal, if it's unchanging, then how can you change it? How can you replace it? How can you delete it? How can you make it be forgotten? That's so inconsistent, it seems like it's more an excuse for Muhammad's own forgetfulness, and, I think we just need to call it out like it is. Sometimes we just, let Muslims get off the hook, like saying, "Okay, yeah, yeah," this explanation, that, sometimes, the explanation they give for abrogation, well, different times and different circumstances needed different messages. Well, then why did Allah put it in His eternal, unchanging, perfect word if it was gonna change a few months later and it became irrelevant a few months later? Because there's 3 kinds of so-called abrogation. There's one kind where, um, the the verse is in the Quran, the verse remains in the Quran. It's called the abrogated verse and the abrogator verse. What does that mean? Abrogated verse is, for instance, the verse that says, "There's no compulsion in religion." The verse says there's no compulsion in religion. You can't force somebody to be a Muslim. But then that is abrogated by 929, which came later and says, "Fight those who do not believe in Islam." And so this later verse abrogates this earlier verse. And it makes you think, Allah did this from all eternity, His perfect word, and you couldn't be consistent. Within a few years, the eternal, perfect, unchanging word of Allah became irrelevant. When it says there's no compulsion in religion, that became irrelevant, and it had to be replaced by fight those who don't believe, which is the opposite message. But because it's the later message, it is called the abrogator. It abrogates line 5. I mean, there's no compulsion in religion. You have your religion, I have mine. Allah didn't know this. The all-knowing Allah, where He has to make people forget it. And there's even something more, in this particular kind of abrogation, the situation with these two verses, and with this, what happens is that both verses are still in the Quran. You can find there's no compulsion in religion in chapter 2 of the Quran. I think I forgot the verse number, 56. And then you'll find also like those who don't accept Islam. And there's no religion accepted by Allah except Islam. So both of them remain in the Quran. But one of them, what they say is that the verdict or the authority of it no longer applies because it's been surpassed by surpassed by this new verse. And so this new verse abrogates, it deletes the last verse. And then you got to think, now Allah from all eternity, you have these, so which essentially you have with these abrogated verses, and there's a lot of them, is just chunks of the Quran that are absolutely worthless. Why? Because they've been deleted. According to the Quran, they've been deleted. Allah makes you forget, or He brought something better um, to where you don't need it anymore. Allah didn't know this. He needed to update His word within a few years when it's the eternal, uncreated word. That seems very consistent. And so, but that's one kind of abrogation. is where both verses are still in the Quran, but one of them is negated. It doesn't apply anymore. It just doesn't apply anymore. And that's okay. But what do you say about a book like that? What do you say about a God who writes a book like that? From eternity past, it was in the preserved eternal tablets like that. And you gotta ask, what kind of God is this that changes his mind like that? So you kinda gotta wink. You gotta wink and say, "Okay." But in reality, I don't think we should really make a point of saying, "You know what? This is almost like a cognitive dissonance where you're holding two contradictory beliefs at the same time. It leads to mental illness." And that's kind of what abrogation does. So anyway, we have this kind of abrogation where both verses are still in the Quran. One of them doesn't apply anymore, and one of them does, because in your story as a later verse. Then you got this other abrogation where um, where the verse is no longer in the Quran, but it still applies. Doesn't it sound just a little crazy? I mean, it's no longer in the Quran, but it still applies. For instance, the verse of stoning the adulterer, that verse is still applies. They still do it. They still do it in Saudi Arabia. They still do it in Iran, especially if you're a woman. They'll do it in Africa, but it's not in the Quran anymore. It doesn't. It used to be in the Quran, but we know what happened to that verse. It was eaten by a goat. It was abrogated. Okay, so it's no longer there. And then we just kind of like they tell you that the Bible's been changed, the Gospel's been changed, the Torah's been changed, but nobody can change the Quran. But a goat did eat this verse. But the verse still applies, and they still kill unalive people for committing adultery based on this verse. That's no longer in the Quran. The verse is no longer in the Quran, but it still applies. A new kind of abrogation. And so both, when you go, well, wait a minute, isn't that odd? I mean, when this book is supposedly preserved perfectly up in Jannah, and yet it's not in the Quran anymore. It's not in the Quran because a sheep ate it. And then you just got to wink and say, okay, all right, the Quran is still, they still believe the Quran is perfect. And then there's another kind of abrogation, which is that the verdict doesn't apply anymore. They don't no longer obey it, and the verse is gone also. The verse is also this is what, like Omar bin Khattab and many of the early Muslims said that the book of Ali Imran was, or no, no, excuse me, Al-Ahzab was the size of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is like 200 verses. Well, it's only 73 verses, meaning that more than two-thirds of it is gone. So whatever was written in there no longer applies, and the verdict no longer applies. Sorry, man. I got too offended. Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of do a little thing, kind of like winking. It's called wink. It's an idea that I had. I worked so late and I'm so tired that I thought, sometimes when the Lord gives you an idea, you should do it. And he kind of gave me this idea, so I thought I would go ahead and do it. And the way you have to kind of wink to justify Islam, just kind of like, okay, right, that it's a pathetic excuse, but you wink and say, okay, all right, whatever. And so, So it just kind of shows you uh, our brother Andrew just sent a verse here that says, "Though the guilty used to laugh at those who believe and wink to one another when you pass by them." Oh, okay. Let me see if I can make it bigger here. This verse about abrogation. You know, you know. I actually don't like this translation. I'm just saying, oh, fix all's okay. Nothing of our revelation, not even a single verse do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we bring in its place one better or like it. So some of Allah's words are better than Allah's other words. So some of Allah's words are better because in the Arabic, the word is the same thing, بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا, better than. Why didn't Allah give the best at the beginning? Why did Allah give the inferior words at the beginning where it had to be abrogated or caused to be forgotten? Why didn't He give the best at the beginning instead of bringing something? So, in other words, the word of Allah up in Jannah, parts of it are good, are better than the other parts. It's not equal. Allah's words are not. Some are better than others, and some of them will have to be totally invalidated. And this is the eternal, unchanging, perfect word of Allah, and yet they do this to it. And I think, you know what? This is a good reason to leave Islam because I know what they say about the Quran. If you burn the Quran, if you touch the Quran, you your life. And yet, look at the internal contradiction within the Quran that, in my mind, really think about this verse, if a Muslim really thinks about this verse, they will leave Islam. If you really think about this verse, you will leave Islam because it just so goes against everything Muslims are taught about the Quran. Everything you're taught about the Quran is invalidated by this verse. It's invalidated by this verse, and we shouldn't wink at it. We should really, say, hey, you really answer this question. Muslims, you need to think about this. And if you do think about it, I don't think you can stay a Muslim because you realize you've been lied to. This verse right here tells you you've been lied to. And it's inconsistent with everything you've been taught about the Quran. So then we got this other verse, I believe. I believe I have the right verse here. Yeah, right here. Never we sent the messenger or prophet before you when he recited the message and opposed opposition in respect to what he recited thereof. Allah abolishes that which Satan proposes. That's not what it says in Arabic. I'm surprised. Surprised by Pixel more from him. But let me go ahead and put another. Oops, oops, what I meant to do. Let's see, transition. So I get you Sahih Hilali Khan. Go ahead for Hilali Khan. And okay, 2252 here. No, okay. Never was sent to that when you recited Satan. Oh no, here's this one. Satan threw some falsehood in it. Satan throws falsehood. I see that's more consistent with what the Arabic says. Is shaitan. Alka is shaitan. And then the alka means to throw. It's the same word that is used in 4171 where it says that the word that Allah cast to Mary. It's literally to throw. Satan throws, I see Satan opposing, but he actually throws into Allah's revelation. What does that say about that Satan was able to sneak some words into it? Satan, uh, Satan was able to sneak some words into the Quran, according to this verse. What about everything that we were taught that is imperfect, eternal, like that? It's uncreated. It's uncreated. Yet Satan is able to cast sneak some words into it. What does that say about the Quran? How does it sneak some words into it? Well, my brother sent us some verses here about abrogation. Uh, Oops. Yes. I have to send it to myself. I forgot. Okay. Healthy means between something. What's my name? Steve. Okay. Here's some verses about abrogation, that in the Quran is when we cancel a message or throw it into oblivion, we replace it with one better or similar. Really? You can do that? Allah abrogates or confirms whatever He wills, or He has within the book of books. If He has the book of books, why does He need to abrogate or confirm the book? If He has the book of books, the eternal, uncreated book of books, why does He have to abrogate? It's like, you know, uh, what does it mean that it's a book of books? Well, it's called the mother of the book in some places. If He has that, why doesn't He just give you the better verse? Just give the better verse at first, the supreme verse that He has, instead of giving the inferior one and then making people forget it. It's ridiculous, and we shouldn't look at it. We should, really, hold their feet to the fire. Say, this is what your book says. It doesn't make sense. You're saying all these wonderful things about the Quran, and Muslims are always saying these wonderful things about this perfect, that uncreated Quran. People burn it, like the guy in Sweden, and he lost his life. Many others have too. It's that perfect, and yet Allah's constantly changing it. It doesn't make sense. So, and verse, and He does whatever He will. It's like Allah doesn't operate on principle; He operates on will, volition. Whatever He wants to do, He does. Not because there's a principle involved, not because there's even a good reason, just because he wants to. And, okay, when we replace a message with another, and Allah knows best what he reveals, they say, "You made it up." Yet most of them do not know. What's interesting about all of this is the way Muhammad is blaming Allah for everything, blaming Allah for his bad memory. Okay, first of all, we cancel messages. So he's blaming Allah's the one who's doing this. He's putting the blame on Allah because he forgot, or he needed to change it because he didn't want to follow a verse anymore. And so he made Allah do it. He says, we cancel it. We replace. That's Allah's. Okay? And then, here, Allah knows best. And it's always kind of just refer that, that if you ask questions about this, it's actually very effective mind control, is that you say it this way, Allah knows best what he reveals. You say that way, if anybody questions it, they are questioning Allah, not Muhammad. You're questioning Allah, and you're Catholic. And so just shut up and accept it. And so he always throws it in, Allah knows best what he reveals. Allah, Allah abrogates what confirms the reveal. Allah's the one who's doing this. It just makes Allah seem very capricious. He doesn't operate on principle. He doesn't operate on his own character or his own holiness or love. He just does whatever he wants. Okay. Now, what 16:11. Let's just read this one again. When we, again, Muhammad's placing it on Allah, we replace a message with another. I mean, is he doing that in the book of books? He has a book of books. Is he in the book of books replacing one message with another? Is he replacing one verse with another? Is he changing the book of books, the eternal, uncreated books out there? Is he changing it too? The craziest explanation I heard about this is, when Kabir Ali was debating Jude Smith, and he said, because there's so many different Qurans, he said all of the different ones are up there. Even if they contradict each other, even if they have different words, different language, all of them are in the preserved tablet. All of them are there. And, that's not what we were taught when we were kids. That's not what we were taught when we were kids in school. And it makes me think we were lied to. You're Muslim, you know. Please think about this. The Quran is telling you that you've been lied to. The Quran is telling you, Allah Himself is telling you that you've been lied to. Because this book is constantly changing, because Allah is changing. Okay? When we replace a message with another, replace, yeah. And Allah knows best what He reveals. They say you made it up because He made it up, because Muhammad made it up. That's why they say you made it up, because he made it up. The people of his day weren't falling for it. The people of his day weren't, they were like, dude, this is crazy. Even back then, and they, think that they were these old Bedouin who didn't understand, they just accepted whatever. No, they thought about this and they said, dude, you're making this up as you go. And then when he came back with a sword and an army, he said, oh, okay, whatever you say. But in reality, they knew, they said to him, you made it up. They knew he made it up. The people of his day knew he made it up. Yet most of them do not know. What kind of an answer is that? Yet most of them. Do some of them know? Most of them don't. But do some of them know? that he made it up. It's so, uh, okay. If we please, okay, well, see, now it's Allah talking. We could take away what we reveal to you, then you will not find anyone to plead for it with us. We could take away. It's like, shut up, quit complaining, quit doubting just because I'm changing it and making you forget it. Quit doubting it, you know, um, or else Allah might take it away. Yare, oh, that He would take it away. You know, and He could take it away what we reveal. Oh, how we wish He would take it away. But it's a threat, by the way. It's a threat. You know, all of a sudden, if you keep complaining, you know what? I'm gonna take it away. And in 5, we talked about this. Allah abrogates that which Satan throws in. You know, this opens. I mean, I know a lot of Muslims don't believe. A lot of them don't believe the satanic verses story because this is related to the satanic verses story where Muhammad is sitting with his relatives. He wanted them to become Muslims, and so he's like, "Allah, give me something that's going to win them." So Satan comes and puts the word, you know, that al-Uzza and Manat, the third, the three daughters of Allah. Their intercession is to be desired. That's what Satan put in his mouth, and what Muhammad put in the Quran. He put it in the Quran. And I don't know, I've heard Rob Christian talk, and I think it was in the Quran for 8 years. I think, wait a minute. Satan put words in the Quran. That's what this verse is saying. This verse is saying Satan put words in the Quran. This verse of the Quran says Satan put words in the Quran. This is text. This is written text. Satan put words in the Quran. But you know, if you believe in the satanic verses story, then you say, okay, we know which word Satan cast in. The words, you know, have you considered the high flying cranes, Alat al Uzza, three, their intercession is to be desired. Those are the words that Satan put in Muhammad's mouth, it says. And he said them, and it was in the Quran for 8 years. So we know what the words are. But if Muslims don't believe in the satanic verses, if they don't believe in that story, then you got to ask them, well, then which words did Satan put on? And are they still there? Is the whole thing from him? Part of it from him? Is the Mecca verses from him? Is the Medina verses from him? What part of the Quran is from Satan? What did Satan throw into the Quran? If you don't believe the satanic verses story, then you have to come up with another explanation about why this verse is in the Quran. Why is Allah warning about satanic verses in his book? In the eternal, uncreated, perfectly preserved, unchanging Quran. Now, this is what Allah says about it. This is what Allah says about it. Satan put words into the Quran. Which words did Satan put in the Quran? That's a question they have for Muslims. Which words did Satan put into the Quran? Allah abrogates what Satan put in. Well, Allah abrogated a bunch of verses that are still in the Quran. Allah abrogated a bunch of verses that are still in the Quran. They don't apply anymore, but they're still in the Quran, but they've been abrogated. So that means that these satanic verses could still be in the Quran. That means these satanic verses could still be in the Quran. Because just because he abrogates it doesn't mean he takes it away. It still could be there in the Quran. Which ones are they? Which ones are they? And I know because in the Arabic the word is ينصر الله من يلقي الشيطان. The same word used about other abrogations. And like I said, there's most of the abrogated verses of the Quran are still in the Quran. Most of the abrogated by, like you could say, 99% of the abrogated verses of the Quran. There's some that are not in the Quran, like the stoning and breastfeeding of adults. That one was eaten by sheep, but the rest of them are still in the Quran. And so these satanic verses are probably still in the Quran. Where is it? Which ones? Muslims, please help us. Tell us which verses of the Quran is Satan are from Satan. Do you know? Are they still in the Quran? When Allah abrogated them, did He just make them disappear? Send another animal to eat them? Or is this verse just about verses, which will open another can of worms for you? Okay. And then by degrees we shall teach thee to declare the message, so thou shalt not forget, except as Allah wills. Yeah, but yeah, Allah's gonna always explain. Allah's always gonna explain this. Yeah, but yeah. Thank you, brother, for this. Let's see, our brother sent us another. He's got all this material, man. Lewis has this amazing, amazing stockpile of information that really praise God, praise God for it. Um, I keep harping on him because I want him to do his own live stream and share all these things. But once I'm sharing here, that's nice to. Well, I don't. Okay. Um, okay. But I do also on other programs to share those things. Is it on the origin? Okay, here. Al Khan translations of the Quran. The verse 569 mentioned in the Quran should not be misinterpreted by the reader as mentioned by Ibn Abbas, that the provision of this verse was canceled by verse 385. Here it's talking about some of the abrogation in the verses. 929 abrogates 2109. The provision of this verse has been abrogated. Okay, these are verses that have actually been abrogated. The provision, meaning that, for instance, it says, stone the adulterer. Well, that provision of that still applies. They still do it. But the verse is not in the Quran, not in, because it's been abrogated, because the sheep ate it. So the provision of this verse has been abrogated. Mm, thank you. I'll look into this, man. It sounds really, yeah. Well, this is one of the ones that I was going to talk about too, and that is the verses about drinking alcohol. That's something that we kind of wink at that alcohol thing because the verses about drinking. On the one hand, let me see if I can find it because there's like three verses about drinking. Um, Okay. And, we let them get away with this. And I'm thinking, you know what? We should not let them get away with this. We should not wink, and we shouldn't accept their explanation because, let me just tell you the problem, first of all. The Quran, first of all, says, don't go to prayer if you're drunk. No, that's not saying, this is a verse of the Quran. It says, don't go to prayer when you're drunk. Now, that verse is not saying don't get drunk. That verse seems to be saying, get drunk if you want to, but don't go to prayer drunk. So if you're drunk, don't go to prayer. But it's not saying don't drink. And then another verse says that alcohol is among the gifts, and it's wonderful. But then it says it's from Satan. And so and the way Muslims explain this is they say there's the three stages of revelation. Really? Really? Three stages of revelation? I'm drunk. And let's just look at some of these. Kind of funny, actually. But we just accept it and say, okay, there's three stages. It's like, really? Okay. The first verse about wine in the Quran was, they ask you about wine and gambling. In them is a great sin. Okay, let me make it bigger so you can see it. In them is a great sin, but some benefit. Yeah, great sin and some benefit for the people. But the sin is greater than the benefit. And they ask if they should, what they should spend, say the excess beyond the need. Then another one says, "Oh, you who believe, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated, until you know what you are saying in the state of janaba." Okay, going through the prayer process until you have washed your whole body. So it's not saying don't get drunk. It's just saying don't go to prayer after you're drunk until you're awake, until you wake up. I want to say in Arabic, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى. They don't come to prayer when you are drunk. حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. Until when you don't know what you're saying. ولا جناب إلى عابر سبيل حتى تغتسلوا. Until you wash yourself. And if you're sick or on a long trip, من الغائط, or if you were in the bathroom. Uh, but it's not saying don't drink. It doesn't say don't get drunk as a skunk. It doesn't say that. It just says don't go to prayer once you've been drunk. If you're drunk as a skunk. But then, oh, you who have believed, indeed intoxicants, gambling, sacrificing on stone altars, not kissing the stone. You can kiss them, but don't sacrifice on them. And divining arrows are defilements from the works of Satan. Okay? So now it's completely prohibited, And it's like, really? Allah didn't know this, you know? Or is it just Muhammad? Is the man's emissions on your clothes like moon? Mm. We have a thank you, Andrew. And for those of you who are interested in the janaba, is having man's emissions on your clothes. Oh boy, yay. Yeah, boy, yay. Muhammad did. He went to prayer like that. So, yeah. But this is another thing that, hey, wait a minute. We shouldn't wink at this. We should really point it out and just really say, hey, there's a problem here. There's a real problem here, and try to get the Muslims to think about it and say, really, think about this verse. And if they really do, I think they will leave Islam because it's not what they were taught. This Quran, it's like it really sounds like the whims of a man. not the words of the eternal God, the eternal words of the eternal, uncreated, unchanging, perfectly preserved words of a perfect God. Doesn't sound like it. Mose robe. Thank you. The verse in Arabic says intoxicated and janaba. Okay. Well, you know what? I have it here. I actually have the verse. Yeah. Um, yes, it says, يا أيها الذي آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر. Okay, that's gambling. والإنصاب الألزام الرجس من عمل الشيطان, is abominations from the works of Satan. اجتنبوا لعلكم تفلحون. So avoid it. Okay, so you could be successful. إنما يريد الشيطان إن يوقع بينكم العداوة. Satan wants to bring enmity between you. That's funny because Allah brings the enmity between people too. So funny, the stuff they do that's a lie. Al-Baghdad. Right here. الشيطان يوقع بينكم العداوة. Copy. I just want to copy this just because okay, I want to see what verse this is. This is 591. 591. I just want to look at this because, okay, 591. I just want to show this other verse. Okay. Put in the Quran here and see if I could find, just because this is another thing that we kind of have to wink at, is that Allah and the Satan seem to do the same things. Okay. We let hostility remain until the day. Okay, right here. It says, look at this verse right here. It says here, it says, from those who say we are Christians, we took their covenant, but they neglected a portion of what they had been commanded to uphold. We let hostility and enmity arise between them until the day of judgment. In the Arabic, it says, فَأَغْرِنَا بَيْنَهُمْ الْعَدَاوَةِ. It means we put between them hatred and enmity until the day of judgment. So Allah does the same thing that Satan does. Allah does the same thing that Satan does. He puts enmity between people. So, just to show you that Allah and Satan have very similar duties. Actually, I got to do a live stream. I'll do a live stream about the similar duties of Allah and Satan, because there's a lot. Okay. All right. Well, shoot, you guys, these are some of the things that we just kind of got a wink at, you know, was inspired. Yeah, I agree with you. It was inspired by Satan. And they, and it's from Satan because the Bible says it gives you a list of how to tell Satan and from the Antichrist. Uh, okay. That's a good, I think it's like 124, but I may be wrong. Let me see. Let me ask. Let me see if I can ask a question. Become bulky. Muhammad needed to be on Jenny Craig. The prophet said, "Do not try to outstrip me in bowing and prostrating, because however earlier I bow, you will join me when I raise my head from bowing. I have become bulky." Inni qad badanat. Let me ask Grok. Let me see if I can ask Grok a question. Hi, Grok. Trying to do this. How many verses of the Quran were abrogated according to Jalaluddin Suyuti? Badrudi. What the heck? Do this thing. Okay. How many?
Hi there, I'm Ara.
How many verses of the Quran were abrogated according to Jalaluddin Suyuti? How many verses of the Quran were abrogated according to Jalaluddin Suyuti? How many verses of the Quran were abrogated according to Jalaluddin Suyuti?
Checking Janetta's view on abrogated Korean verses.
No, that's not what I said. Stop.
I couldn't find any reference
No,
to a scholar or
stop.
figure named Janetta discussing abrogated verses in the Quran, let alone anything tied to Korean verses. It might be a typo or mix up. If you're thinking of classical Islamic scholars, numbers vary wildly. Al Suyuti lists 21 abrogated verses. Ibn Salama claims 238, and some say up to 500 or more. Most modern views lean toward very few, or none at all, depending on how strictly they define abrogation, nesk. If Janetta is someone specific or Korean.
Okay. So some of them say over 500 verses. And, one of the things that I believe it was Jalaluddin Suyuti that said it, he said that all of the peaceful verses of Mecca were abrogated by the verse of the sword. Yeah, let me see if it was that. How many verses of the Quran were abrogated by Quran 9:5, according to Jalaluddin Suyuti? How many verses of the Quran? Oops. How many peaceful verses of the Quran were abrogated by Quran 9, verse 5?
Digging into that Quran verse now. The number 122, or sometimes 140, pops up in anti-Islam polemics, like on Quora or Reddit threads, as if Quran 9:5, the sword verse, wiped out that many peaceful verses. But honestly, it's not backed by serious scholars. Most classical experts, like Al-Suyuti, only count about 20 total abrogations in the whole Quran, none saying 9:5 nukes hundreds of peace ones. Some medieval guys, like Ibn al-Jawzi, floated higher figures, maybe up to 140. But even they meant specific war-related rulings, not blanket cancellation of mercy, tolerance, or no compulsion verses, like 2256. Modern views, like from Yaqeen Institute or Shabir Ali, call the whole all peaceful verses abrogated thing a myth. Verse 9:5 was about a particular treaty-breaking group in Mecca, not a forever rule. The Quran's peace stuff stays valid. Context matters. So no, not 122. Zero, really. If you're asking about genuine abrogation of peaceful teachings.
Money from Elon Musk instead of from Mohammed bin Salman. But the Quran says that Allah abrogates verses. It's many times in the Quran. And many peaceful verses were abrogated by 9:5. She's like pretending she can't hear me. Okay. Well, you guys, we actually made it to an hour, and so that's kind of what I wanted to do. So being with us, sorry I'm so late today. I got off work late today. So thank you for being with us. And if you haven't done it, please do it now. Jesus, help me. Jesus, forgive me. Jesus, come into my heart. Jesus, help me. Jesus, forgive me. Jesus, come into my heart. يسوع ساعدني. يسوع سامحني. يسوع ادخل قلبي. We love you, but much, much more importantly, he loves you. Thank you so much for spending a few moments with us. Have a blessed night. And by the way, make sure and tell my wife happy birthday.